Good day, everyone. We are so excited to be with you again on MC Radio, and we have a juicy, very deep topic to talk about today. It's all about unconscious bias. So let's just start with fundamentally, what is the unconscious mind versus the conscious mind? So I'll start with the latter. So, if I think about conscious bias, or just even what happens within our conscious mind, it's really those logical, rational things that we've thought of before, and we've already made a decision if we're for or against something, if we love it or we don't. Unconscious bias, though, is a little bit different. It's what I like to think of as that secret pocket of feelings, memories, emotions that we don't even know are there, but are absolutely a part of who we are and our well being. So, with that, I think Chloe has a pretty ridiculous game
Who knew?
put me through. So with that, I will pass it to Miss Chloe.
Okay, so I did a little bit of exercise research to figure out what are some blatant unconscious versus conscious scenarios. And what I found out is actually what I thought was going to be blatant was not. So I'm going to put you through some scenarios, just kind of rapid, and you tell me whether it goes under conscious and unconscious. So hopefully this will help people delineate, or maybe it'll make everyone more confused. We'll see.
Well, this should get interesting because what's conscious to me is probably not conscious to someone else, but let's do it.
Well, then we'll just end the recording there. That's the truth, guys. It's different for everyone. Okay, so the fight or flight response. Conscious or unconscious?
I think that's unconscious.
Okay, 1 point for Mara. Okay, a woman who's left for maternity leave and comes back to a job where she is met with the comment, I wish I could have taken 3 months off.
I think that's conscious, but I know a few people where that's probably unconscious.
Okay. Ding, ding, ding. Do we give you both sides? I don't know how to keep score here. Okay, a news headline reading, what is top of mind for CEOs today? That's the title. What is top of mind for CEOs today? And the accompanying image is a white male.
Oh, well, I say that's conscious.
Okay.
I must not have gotten that point.
I'm like, we'll just move on.
I think it's conscious, but it's probably unconscious, but go ahead.
Depending on who you are, right? Okay, so putting controversial signs in your yard because you know it will upset your neighbors.
Oh, conscious.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
You said
yes.
You know.
Changing your feedback on a candidate in a post-interview session because most others thought differently than you.
That could be unconscious because I feel like based on the secret pocket and how you were raised, if you tend to, for whatever reasons, right? Maybe it's your parents who, go with the flow, or, they're easily influenced by others, therefore you are. You've had an experience in your life where it forced you to kind of go with the crowd. That could be very unconscious. So I'm going with unconscious.
Okay, I'm going to give you that point this time.
Okay. Because I gave an explanation. Got it.
See, always show your work, right? Isn't that what they tell kids?
That's exactly.
Okay, hosting a team outing and excluding the least liked member of the team so we can keep the vibes going.
Oh, conscious.
And last one, writing hate speech on a social media post.
Oh, conscious.
Some people would argue the other way, but you're wrong.
I'm like, sometimes the hate speech, though, comes from an unconscious place, but I think that's conscious.
Yes. So as you can see, we're going to do our best to break all this down and kind of walk you through some trainings and some exercises that we've been put through. But it's a very sticky situation. And the point of it all is that if you're looking at it from the lens of your own, understanding your environment, your background, it could be conscious or unconscious, where the person next to you, the exact same scenario, could be flipped. So
yeah, and let me just pre-warn everyone, once you start tapping into this world and getting a little bit deep, all of your unconscious is about to become conscious, and then you got to make actual decisions, which I'm excited to talk a little bit about, some of our experiences in that way. So
yeah. And that's the thing. I actually read this. It unconscious bias, we'll just put it out there, everybody has it. But unconscious bias clouds and undermines our decisions. So take your pen out and write that down. It clouds and undermines your decisions. Because the point is that we're not doing it intentionally when our biases come out, but they do in fact create roadblocks in our life. So that's why it gets brought up a lot in hiring. That's why it gets brought up a lot in the business world. But, as we kind of talked through and we're going to share with you all today, it comes out in every aspect of your life.
Every aspect. I'll be honest with you, Chloe, when I first went through an unconscious bias training, I didn't know what I was in store for. It was literally like a half a day in a room full of people that did not look like me. And it's kind of funny because I was like, oh, I don't need this training. Like I'm, very open to diverse experiences and diverse people. I mean, I am a walking diversity flag. Like I don't need this. I got out of that training. I was like, ooh, I got all kinds of biases that have nothing to do with ethnicity, race, gender. I mean, just who you are and how you grow up plays a huge part in how you view the world and how your perceptions are. So,
yeah. So tell us about how to identify the biases.
yeah, so there's some core categories that each of us, really have that you can identify, very specific things. So I'll first take you through how I went about those categories, and then I'll call out the categories. So if you're someone who's like, I'm taking notes and I need to make a list, you kind of know where I'm going with it. But, I think about me. So born and raised in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Whoop.
Whoop, whoop. Mom is Mexican American, dad is African American. I grew up going to, at the time, the better school in Albuquerque, predominantly white. I was in gifted programs growing up from second grade up. I played sports, specifically soccer and basketball. I decided on my own, once my parents didn't really have a religion, if you will, that I wanted to be a Christian. So started going to a Christian church in high school. I'll stop there, but some of the things I called out are very specific to where I grew up, very specific to race and ethnicity of my parents. If you think about like organizations, this is one of the things that was posed in my training, like what organizations are you a part of? And at first I'm like, I'm not a part of any, but if you take a step back and think of like the definition of an organization, I definitely am a part of like a basketball group in my city. I'm definitely part of a soccer community in my city. Obviously my church is an organization that I'm a part of that community. So that's a huge part of it. If you think about just even what you're exposed to, passions and interests, right? All of that comes into play when you start to uncover what could be my unconscious bias. I may have missed some. So Chloe, I know you've been through these trainings with me as well, but those are some of the main categories that stood out to me, as I started to dig a little deep in this topic.
Yeah, I think those are the perfect ones to start with, because if you start with young age, that might have a couple ticks, or like things you can control, right? Like race, where you grew up, your parents' ethnicity. There's some things that are just from the jump. And then there's things that you're put into, maybe it's sports. For me, I was in sports when I was a kid too, all the way through high school, and then coached when I was in college. So I've been involved in sports too. Talk about developing some biases. Coaching high school girls, there's plenty of testing moments. But if you start, kind of compartmentalizing your life in just like chunks of time, and like doing those boxes again, like what groups am I in? What things have I been exposed to now? Because your biases can change, right? It's funny
Mhm.
because I joined the workforce as a millennial, and at that
Okay.
point it was like I was on every single, not me, I felt personally attacked, but it wasn't me, it was a millennial. We were
Yeah.
on every slide deck. It was like, how do we cater to millennials? They have no allegiance to companies. How do we keep them? They they're whiny and they don't work as hard. You have to so you get into a room full of other people's biases. And so as I've gone through the workforce, I've shifted some of my biases too, just based on my experience, my
Yep.
understanding of other people. So if you kind of just take inventory of those chunks of time of your life, it'll be interesting what kind of pops out as, oh, I was involved in this, and this was something I wasn't involved in. For me, for instance, I grew up, one of four kids in suburbia. We had kids in every grade that were the same age as me and my siblings. It was this just giant, like Pleasantville type of experience.
Yep.
And, went to church every single weekend. And my parents spent every single weekend doing philanthropic things, baking pies for people. Um,
Mm.
so it's funny, as I'm doing inventory, I'm like, if people don't bring a side dish to a party, I'm like, what is wrong with you? Do you care about people? And it's
Uh,
like deep ingrained in me. Like, we went out of our way to bake pies for people, and you're not even going to bring them to a barbecue. Oh my gosh. Okay.
well,
But
even the four kids, I'm an only child. So that is a compartment for me as
mhm,
to like certain ways I move through the world. I mean, it's not purposeful, but I accidentally have in moments, not all the time, but like a selfish, I'm the center of the world mentality about things. But
mm,
it's only because that's how I moved through the world, right? I think the positive side of that is like I can roll by myself, I can be alone
mm,
and I can entertain myself, right? But there's things even like that. That's a perfect one. Like what was your family makeup and how
right.
did that accidentally, impact some of the ways you think about the world?
Yeah. It's funny because I think, Mari, you and I have talked about this, but I'm the baby of four. And you go, oh, okay.
I get the same thing. They're like only child. They're
Hmm.
like,
Mm,
should have known.
okay. It's like, are you putting your biases on me right now?
What
You're
about
like,
your
this is more about you.
astrology sign? Do you think that's something?
I don't know. I'm a Gemini. I know.
I'm a
Um,
Capricorn.
every, everyone who has like those kind of spicy signs, they say it and they're like, I know, relax. I get it. Okay. But
I
yeah,
know there's a twin.
yeah, there is. Well,
There is.
okay,
No, there
there
is.
is, but
I haven't met her, by the way, but I know she's in there.
suppress deep inside. Did I tell you I was raised in the church? No, I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. Deep suppression.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's the funny thing about learning your biases and kind of moving through this professional world and paying attention to these things is that twin, funnily enough, doesn't come out as much, right?
Yeah.
Because you become more self-aware in general. So taking that inventory, you're like, oh, there's pit stops everywhere, right? And you just
Yeah.
have to pay attention to them and you shift. That's the whole point of wanting to get better and understanding your biases, is that shift.
Yeah. Well, and you know what those compartments did for me? So when we went through the exercise, we had a buddy with us, right? And you would go through the exercise and then like turn and share. So what's interesting, I said this a moment ago, right? The room looked different than me. And so I oftentimes, right, wrong, or indifferent, right? I look at unconscious bias, honestly, like female, young, minority. And it's because, right, I'm female, young, and minority. So that tends to be the way, I automatically characterize it. But when you go through this, you realize it stretches far beyond, right? Like the gentleman I was working with, right? White male. So in my mind, I've already come up with everything I think his unconscious bias is. But it was actually very different, right? He's part of the Jewish community. His particular family wasn't as stringent with the way they rolled. And so they felt a little different than
Mhm.
other people within their Jewish community. And so when I looked at this individual, what's actually interesting working with him over the years is he's very open to the underdog. He's very open to very diverse groups, but it's because his experience, although I looked at it too black and white and I was way too simplistic about it, it's allowed him to, move through the world with a completely different conscious and unconscious approach So like everything he does, whether that's personal, whether that's professional, whether that's still, even within, his religious practices. So, it kind of dawned on me that it's like, wow, we all have major unconscious biases based on experiences. And it stretches like way past, some of this normal stuff. I know, Chloe, when we were talking earlier, you had one that I'm like, oh my gosh, that is a good unconscious bias. So you have to share that before we get off this call.
Okay. Should I do it now?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. So, Mara and I have done these trainings and they were a few years ago. And, I just feel so enlightened since then that I forgot all about where I was stage one. Totally kidding. But it's true because I'll tell you, this isn't what Mara was just going to tell me to bring up, but I'm somewhat blissfully unaware of some of my surroundings sometimes. And I think so I miss some things where maybe somebody's inflicting their bias on me, or I could be putting my bias on them. So I guess it's kind of good. I have a terrible memory, so that's not great. But as I'm redoing kind of my inventory, one of the things I thought about was my parents and the fact that their happiness and their success in this life was because of their family. They got married very young. They've been together for 43 years. They had 4 kids, and you know what I mean? So their happiness that they wanted for their children was kind of pushed in that same path because people only understand really their own path in this world. And so when I was growing up, I never focused on school. I got by, I went sometimes, and I didn't have this thirst for learning because I thought my path in life was to get married, have kids, and then like, that's it. So I created this bias for women or men that I would run up against that said, oh, I'm career focused. I felt like immediately kind of attacked. Yeah, I'm like, Mara, I didn't like you. So I'm glad we met later in life. No, but I felt kind of attacked because I felt like, well, are you looking down on what I think happiness is or what we should be doing with our lives? It was not get a job and make $1 million, climb the corporate ladder, because my parents didn't even understand that type of mindset. So as I'm moving through my adulthood, I get married, I have a kid young, and then guess what? It all blows up. And I'm like, what do I do now? And it's totally fine, right? Everybody has their own experiences. But had I been told at a younger age to work hard, get an internship, that's key, get an internship, focus on the day after graduation instead of the day of graduation, I probably would have a lot easier time getting through my corporate life now. I have a hard time learning things sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't excite me because early in life, I'm like, I'm just going to have babies. I'm going to have babies. And if that's what you want to do, that's also great. But for me, my life blew up. So plan B was a late in life plan that I put in place. And it was like immediate. It was like, oh crap, what do I do now?
Yeah, but what I love about what you're saying is like it gives you, first of all, I love it because I told you earlier, like it's very different than my little shell. Like, I know it's a race thing, it's a ethnicity thing, it's a gender thing, it's an age thing. I think like your specific story, as I've been thinking about it, it just reminds me that like it's okay. Like nothing's wrong with your unconscious bias. You're not a bad person because of your unconscious bias. But recognizing it is interesting and important because, like I think of things specific to if someone isn't really tough skin and they can't, like they have an utter meltdown about something that I think is simple, I'm like, I don't like it. Toughen up. There's people in the world really going through some things. Like, why is this such a big deal? But once I learned unconscious bias and realized, you know what, like their experiences probably totally make them feel some type of way, whether that's how they grew up with their parents, or maybe they've been in a relationship that was abusive and therefore they're sensitive. I mean, there could be a million reasons why that person does have a meltdown or why it stresses them. And so it's allowed me to be like way more empathetic. Like they're probably really going through something and I need to get into their shoes and on their page versus like thinking they're just weak. Because a lot of people aren't necessarily weak because they're, having a meltdown or crying.
Toughen up, soldier.
Yeah, it's like, but I feel like there's nothing wrong with it. But when you identify it, it does help. I feel like, you navigate new relationships and business relationships and even personal relationships.
Yeah, I think the relationship part is key because as a lot of companies or even as individuals, we're like self-educating here, but as companies work more towards having a diverse, right? Diversity can look and feel a million ways, just like biases. But as we push to have more of a diverse workforce, management has to be able to have those types of relationships. And I think this training is like fundamental, baseline one. And then on top of that, there's
Baseline.
so much to do because if you can hire diverse candidates all you want, but the second they get into your company and they don't feel heard, they don't feel understood, they don't even feel like they have a way to go anywhere. I mean, your efforts are wasted.
Well, and what's familiar to us and what is unconscious and conscious bias is not the same for everyone. So, like, if you grow up in a community where everybody went to college, right? The people you went to school with, all of their parents are doctors, lawyers, achievers, VPs, entrepreneurs, and CEOs. For you, you don't understand the person. You don't even understand why someone can't go be amazing in college because they grew up in the ghetto
Yeah.
or they grew up different. Your mind can't even get there because what's normal to you and how you grew up is very different than the rest of the world, And what's interesting about hiring is exactly that, right? Like I know a lot of managers, and I understand it. I went to college, and being able to persevere through college is something people should pay attention to, right? But like I know a ton of hiring managers like, well, if they don't have a college education, I'm not even going to take a look. And I'm like, that
Mm,
person might have life experience that allows them to be crazy effective in negotiation skills and overcoming a no in I mean just in the way they view the world, kind of bringing in a whole team to help a customer as an example. So the fact that we automatically are like, well, they didn't go to college, my circle goes to college, no, I'm not even going to take a
right.
look, is like, hold up now. Because I know some bad mama jammas that they didn't go to college, but they're some of the best business people I know, right?
Well, I was going to say, and let's be honest, college is more fun than it is work. Okay. So, and I'm just saying that because I didn't
Yeah.
care about school, but truly, like, you imagine the mental toughness that it takes to leave high school and join the workforce that we're in. Like, I can't even imagine. I got 5
Good
extra
point.
years to play around and, take a few classes here and there and work part-time jobs. Like, a lot of college students, yes, they take it maybe more seriously than I did, but it is a buffer period of your life. And so if someone doesn't have that, they're immediately pushed into a world where people are at a different scale, a different
Yep.
pace, and they have to adapt. So to me, that is key in hiring somebody.
Yeah, you just made me think of a good example. And, there's a gentleman that I mentor, and you can tell when you look at his experience and chat with him, like, he's legit, right? He's the real deal. And he just has these unique experiences from his previous company he worked at and at HP that you're like, wow, he interacts with like C levels, right? Super financial acumen and accounting acumen. I mean, he just blows me away. However, as I've gotten to know him, he's one of the more quiet individuals.
Mm,
And in my head, I think of calls I sit on, and I am in the sales organization, so it's different, right? But the squeakiest wheel is usually thought of as like, oh, they're the thought leader, or they're the smart one, or wow, they're very engaged. And I can relate to this gentleman I mentor because I can be quiet and observant as well. But I think that's one of those other unconscious bias that you just assume the introverts or the really, really quiet people, like maybe aren't as smart or they don't know as
mm.
much, right? And my experience is usually quite the contrary. The person who's quiet on the call, they're probably absorbing everything people are saying. They're analyzing and calculating exactly how they would respond, exactly how they would solve an issue. But our unconscious bias thinks that the quiet person isn't the strongest person on the team. And
Mhm.
a lot of times like I said, it's literally, the opposite, literally.
Yeah. I think that happens with a lot of things that we don't, well, of course it's unconscious, we don't realize, but
Yeah.
there's a thing about like ageism, right? Is
Yep.
the older person on the team more tenured and they are valued for their knowledge, or are they, behind in technology, right? And so it just takes two different individuals to see it two different ways. And
Yep.
so it's kind of crazy because the same thing with the quiet person can be said in the same way. I unfortunately am not the quiet person, so I'm gonna maybe need to put that on my list.
You're
I'm
sharp up. You're on your game.
It's like, when there's quiet moments in a meeting, I'm like,
I'm
anybody have any
uncomfortable. Yeah, we're
dad
about to talk.
jokes or
Yeah, I'm the same. I can just hop right on in sometimes.
hmm. But now that I know people think the quiet one, all right. See, knowledge is power. That's what we're
No.
doing here. We're giving you guys cheat codes.
Real game, free game
Cheat
today
codes.
on MC
Yeah.
Radio.
What's so funny about the whole notion of hiring, though, is, you and I were a part of a training that we put managers through. Unconscious bias, it was obviously, a developed training that was already in place, but we tacked on a fun workshop at the end to talk about hiring specifically, right? Unconscious bias, like we said, is like figure out what's going on from when you were young to current. But with hiring specifically, it was funny because we started the exercise, do you remember, with
I do.
throw out all the qualities that you're looking for in a candidate. And the managers said, perseverance, attention to detail, passion, all these things that sound great. And yes, absolutely, we want people who are going to be hardworking and detail oriented and all of this. But it's funny because you peel back the layers, and when you're in an actual hiring position, that's not a lot of times what you're actually looking for, right?
Nor is it the questions you're asking the candidate.
Right. And like we found that out by saying, here's this great list. Okay, we narrowed it down to 10. You've picked, agility and be able to pivot your way quickly with ideas. That's great. Now, when you're in an interview, what are you actually asking?
No, it's real. I mean, sometimes people will look at a resume and be like, wow, they bounced around 2 or 3 times. I'm definitely asking that question. Where it's like, why aren't you trying to figure out like their superpower or the it
Mm,
factor or their growth mindset? Like, why aren't you, if you really want agility and perseverance, there's nothing on that resume that's going to tell you anything about agility or perseverance.
right.
I'm just saying, I'm just keeping it real.
So, what are your thoughts on companies that have like the same 10 questions for every single candidate, and that's the only way that you interview versus freestyle based on the candidate?
So I do think you need a mix of both. The only reason I say that is I remember sitting in the unconscious bias training, and he was saying, hey, if you're not really giving an even playing field to every candidate you interview, you're already starting someone off in the completely different space. So I think there are some things that need to be common. I mean, one thing I love about the majority of managers I work with is they have shifted to growth mindset questions, which is good, right? Because if someone can even draw upon a personal moment where they tried something new, it failed, and what they learned, I get way more of your mindset on that than questions like, tell me about a time when, I
Yeah.
like behavioral questions, but I care more about like their thought process. Sometimes I ask a question and someone will tell you, well, I hate when the process is too cumbersome, it's too complex, and this really bothers me. Well, I know exactly how that person is going to feel in this
Mm,
role and how they're going to potentially persevere or not, right? And they might not be a fit because we're in a complex, cumbersome world sometimes, right?
yeah.
Or they might say, but I enjoy getting through that. I enjoy solving for that. And here's an example of where that was happening. Here's the solution and the way I came up with it. And here's the outcome. I'm like, I like that person because they're going to come with a solution. They're not just going to pout about why everything is not so great, right? So anyways, first part of that question, I think some things you need to level the playing field. The other, I think you got to dig deep on who somebody is.
Mm.
And you
So how do you do that?
style. Well, you ask them questions about, I mean, I even think about the categories we started this chat about, right? Like, where are you from? What's your dream job, right? Like, I love asking that question because, you know, if someone's really prepared for a sales role in a sales interview, they're going to tell you what, they're salespeople, right? They're going to tell you what you want to hear and that they can't wait to, you know, have a compensation plan that allows them to maximize their earning potential, right? And they're hunters and they love building relationships. But I'm, you know, like I said, I'm more interested in like, who are you? And, you know, tell me about some experiences that really make you feel, you know, one way or another. Or I'm going to give you a realistic situation where I'm about to be honest and tell you the ugly part of the role. And I want to know, like, genuinely, like, how does that make you feel? And I think, you know, what I like about that is once someone's onboarded and you've gone through an interview like that, all that vulnerabilities out there, all that comfort with, I can be me, I can be really me. I can tell Mara, you know, I don't like this, Mara. Coach me through it, right? Versus me having a judgment of, oh my gosh, they can't deal with obstacles or they can't deal with those things. So, you know, I think you have to just ask them a lot more about who they are, you know, what drives them, what motivates them. I know that's a common one too. And some people will say, well, money motivates me, right? But it's like, well, no, what's your purpose? Like, what's your dream job? And I also think it helps you, like dream job's the good one, right? Sometimes I talk to a lot of interns who are in marketing and, you know, they want to like do cool Nike ads. Like you could just tell they want to go be like an influencer and someone who's marketing. And when I talk to them, I love it because I can quickly tie what we do here, what they want to do, how they can start influencing, how they can build their brand and resume in a way that allows them to start building the blocks to be like the Nike, you know, next commercial person, right? But I just don't know. I just feel like you gotta like, just who are they? Like forget else, like who are you?
I feel like we can do an entire section on interview questions and like what's wrong with them. You know, I've been in so many interviews where it, to me, again, I'm like, that has got to be implicit bias, right? You know, there's one particular answer you're looking for with this question and you're judging anybody who falls short. And I think that's like a
like
huge,
what? Give me an example.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. I'm so glad you asked. So I'm just thinking back. So I've been in several interviews and one interviewer always asks a prioritization question, right? And what they want is a perfect list based on their priorities of urgency. But unfortunately, you're talking to people who don't actually live in our world. They're trying by this job interview. And so they're giving them very specific tasks to the current job. It's unfair. They have no idea what we do, right? I mean, they could research our company all day long. But I think it's things like that where like you walk into it with a mental scorecard, you know, and it's a mixture of what you think will fit in your team, right? Fit is one, and what you think like an all-star would look like, and your own personal desires. So it becomes like this mix of all three of them, and people fall short a lot. And you can tell by the post-interview sessions. But I kind of like those questions of like, you know, what are you passionate about? Because first of all, it lets the guard down. But when you hear someone talk about something they're passionate about, you like see lights in their eyes. And then, you know, you can kind of let yourself down a little bit. But interviews are just so
real funny. Real quick on prioritization. So I'm actually not opposed to that question, but what's really funny, which you'll
don't interview with Mara.
Wait, what's really funny though about that question is, so when I got out of unconscious bias training, I'm like, okay, I need to switch gears. I've shared this before in one of our other segments that based on my categories and how I grew up, I'm the person that like, if they served tables or played sports, I'm like, oh, they're money. Oh, they're about, you know, you guys know that about me. I'm like, so I had to switch gears, right? So one of the ways I did it was, I'm like, I'm diversifying my panel, right? I'm not going for underdogs. I'm not only going to bring in minorities, right? I'm going to bring in people who think completely different than me because I want all that feedback. But that sounds really like, ooh, that's a good idea. And it is. But what's funny is like, we'll go into like the post session of like, what did you think of the candidate? And like the priority question, all four of us will be like, well, no, this is how I would prioritize. And the others are
See?
like, no, this is how and you're like, well, we don't even know if they graded good or not.
Okay, so throw the prioritization out. Everyone's failing. We're all failing.
Even the manager, it's just funny, like what we think of, right? Or I also laugh at stuff like they have to be organized. If someone ever saw my email inbox, I probably shouldn't confess this nationally, but I'm going to. Like, I don't have folders. Everything's in my inbox. I know.
Oh my gosh, you're like giving me hives.
Well, for me, I'd rather just hit my search tool, keep it pushing, grab it and go. When I organize, girl, it's just, I'm
See what
like,
I
did I
mean?
put that in the customer file or the demo file? Like,
The
I'm that
advice
person.
is even about stupid things.
So
Or
anyway,
like,
so my point is like, no, neither of us are less or more effective at our role or getting what we need to the customer. But that whole notion, that's a great example of like, they have to be organized. I'm like, it depends on how you define organized and what that actually means. So.
yeah, but diverse panels of interviewing though, even though you skipped over it, that is key though, because I mean, as long as the environment is facilitating inclusion amongst those diverse people who are interviewing, right? Because it goes back to that question I asked you of someone assimilating their opinions based on the majority. And the point of diversifying the interview panels is not so that people can feel excluded and mush their opinions.
Right. Well, and it's helpful because when we talk about like who you are, so there's times where on paper and how the person interviews, they're crazy talented, right? But when you get to the post interview part and everyone's talking, like one of the first things I ask, right? Because so this is all about energy and do we feel like they give a positive impact to the world? And do we feel like they're going to lift us up as leaders, right? But I'll ask, my very first question at the gate is, so would you work for this person? Before I even get into how did they answer stuff, you know, and sometimes there's talent and the whole room will be like, nope. And you're like, okay, we don't even need to continue the conversation. But I think things like that, I mean, that's kind of how you have to also think about it. You said something earlier, like, do they mesh with the team? Do they fit in? You know, to me, it's not just that. I mean, I do like chemistry, but I also like that healthy tension. I mean, some of the most, you're one of them, Chloe, but some of the most like headbutting people or people who will call out something like this is stupid. While in the moment, I'm not loving it, I do like it because, well, it's true, because over time you're like, I needed to hear that opinion, right? There's other people in the world. The world is not made up of a bunch of Maras.
Yeah.
And what they want to feel good about, right? The world is a diverse world that needs everything. And your best way as a leader to really cater to the world and make everybody's happy meter high is you have to grab inputs from everybody and then go from there, right? Select the best, smartest ways that really contribute to the business and contribute to their well-being, and you go from there. And that's like, you know, that's so important. And real quick, sorry, I'm rambling, but you know, the whole diverse panel. I remember one time, I'm going to reserve names, but they'll know who it is if they listen. You know,
I'm going to tag them.
Yeah, yeah, you're tagged. At Guillermo Martinez. Yeah. Anyways, Guillermo's one of those people that keeps me very balanced when it comes to hiring. And I remember we were in an intern interview and the intern was super technical and, you know, no sales experience. And right away, I'm like, I don't know if the field reps will mesh with them. Like how, you know, could they actually pitch a product? But Guillermo kindly reminded me, he had asked him about some of his passions, the intern, and you said it, when he lit up and talked about it, you're like, oh, he can sell anything because when he's passionate about it and he knows a thing or two, he lights up a room. Right. And so, you know, that's why diversifying your panel is important and really taking in that people like Guillermo are talented and they think different. So that individual is one of the baddest interns I've ever seen, and one of the biggest contributors to our business and advancing our organization in certain ways I would have never known. And I almost skipped right past him because he was like too technical, too, I don't know if he has the charisma, if you will.
Mm.
One of the baddest I've seen come through our site.
And you know what's so funny, as you're talking, I'm kind of thinking like, I we talked about this earlier, but when you start going through bias training, you kind of become biased for those who are not trained on bias.
Oh no.
But like I'm thinking about the interviews I've been involved in, and I'm like, actually it's the people who are totally different than me that I'm like, oh, they've got game. Like meet me with a technical dude and I'm like, you will kill it. And maybe it's because I'm like yin to my yang. We're not actually going to be partners, so I'm not really sure why I think that. But it's like there's just so many ways to be faceted in this world, And so
That's
I don't
your
know.
Gemini. See, I'm a Capricorn. Capricorns think they're know-it-all. Well, when I read about them, they say Capricorns are know-it-alls. It's their way or the highway. So I'm someone who absolutely needs it. I am very inclusive. I do want to hear people's ideas, but before going through this training and tapping in, I used to still just want to do my original idea, right? If that makes sense. So I'd almost waste people's time, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to get all their feedback and I'm just being honest, right? And all their information. But I still thought like, my idea sounds better. But over time, I'm like, no, you got to let them fly. And a lot, I tease about Capricorns, and some of you are probably like, I don't believe in that stuff, but Capricorns are Capricorns. I don't care what y'all say. But there's individuals I work with that are a whole nother version of the old me. And I see it clearer now. And I'm like, it's okay. Let other people fly. Like, some people are smooth operate. I think of like, Let's Get Social. That is a very diverse team and everybody comes completely different. But that's the beauty and why it's successful, is because everybody rocks out in their own way. And me, just, you guys do you. I know you got it. Those are the special moments that touch, again, your broad audience, your diverse audience. Not everybody likes hazelnut coffee.
I don't like hazelnut coffee.
Some people like different flavors, right? Some people like Frappuccino. Some people like, you need different flavors, like, because the rest of the world likes different flavors. Like, that's what it is. Speaking
of, do you have a bias of people who go to a coffee shop and order like a really complex order? Because I
used to, but I'm that person now. I got
See, it evolves.
I got a Breville Barista Pro. Those are a little pricey, but yeah, I'm in there doing all kinds of little. On Pinterest, I even have like the different types of espresso, and so now.
See what I mean? It evolves. At one point I was the hated generation, and now I've moved up because apparently I'm old now. I have a side part and skinny jeans, and I am ancient apparently. So the new young bucks who come into the office, I'm like, you have no life experience. Just give me 5 years.
Yeah. Well, now I'm on the older range of millennial. Older. Like, I think I'm at the very end.
On the cusp.
I'm on the bookend of it. But now millennials are in the workforce. They truly are the majority. So.
And guess what? The world didn't fall apart like all the slide decks said that it would. Okay.
That, and that whole they're entitled. There are some, right? But I think all of us are now with the internet and having things easily accessible to us. But no, there's people who have old school work ethic, legitimate, I don't know why
I always just tell my mom that I'm efficient. Okay. Millennials have created efficiency, and so we're called bratty, but it's sorry, we want the oceans to be clean and for people to be vegans. I'm not a vegan, but we want people to be vegans.
It's true. I will say that millennials do operate in a completely different, efficient way. What would take, I'm a millennial, I know, but I don't feel like I'm in that group all the time. But what might take, but seriously, what might take me a couple of hours to go figure out, younger millennials, or what comes after millennials, Gen Z. I might have.
Yeah, we don't talk about them. Okay.
Because
they're
the
on my
part.
list. The side part is Come
But
on.
they'll pump out that 2 hour thing in like, 20 minutes, 15 minutes. And it like looks cooler and more interactive and like creative. I'm like, okay, there's something to this efficiency thing. Like, no wonder
Yeah.
they have time for ping pong and video games. Like,
Well, that's the thing, generational bias, you know. I read that there's a thing about height bias, that apparently anybody over six
mm,
feet makes an average of $5,500 more a year than anybody who's 5'5", and that's regardless of race, age, gender, any of that.
I've heard
So
that.
apparently people who are taller are
So one
perceived.
time I was at a leadership conference and someone brought that up and the whole room was like tall people. And I was like, ooh, they are
Morris
proving the
stands up and people just
statistic.
keep going.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, I feel tall. Okay.
Yeah, that's all that matters. That's all that matters. It's just, it's so crazy when you peel back these things, you know, but the very
Yeah,
same person could feel wronged by a tall person, you know. Tall
yeah.
people make my sister uncomfortable because she's very petite. So,
It's what it is. No, this is such a great conversation. I can honestly go on and on about it because I just feel like there's several scenarios I come across all the time, specific to this. And, if anything, if it helps you slow down and dig deep within yourself, I think that's obviously super important. If you are someone that's in a hiring role, if it allows you to slow down and just understand you and even the way you might want to approach hiring diverse thoughts, right? I'm not even talking ethnic and racial, right? But like dig deep on where people are from, how they grew up, right? What geographically, where did they reside? Do they move around a lot? I mean, that starts to give you a sense of how they might move through a role and what benefits it can bring to your team. And I think last but not least, like it allows you, like I mentioned earlier, I know for me, this was a personal, like, the beautiful thing out of it is just the empathy,
mhm.
allowing you to sit back and be like, they're a reason, they're this way for a reason. The same way I'm this way for a reason. And it's okay. And it allows me to work with them and kind of remove, whatever it is I think that could be negative and, just drive into the same goal a lot quicker than like not even putting up with someone, to begin with because of my, either unconscious or conscious bias. So I think it's a great topic. I think people need to get trained. Just
Do
saying.
it. There's trainings everywhere. There's books everywhere. If you don't have it in your organization, spearhead it yourself. That's what we did. We
Yeah.
had parts of it and then we created the rest because we felt passionate about having not only hiring managers, but also people in just individual roles get trained on these for their personal growth and their professional growth. And it will shock you where all those pit stops are that you can stop at and say, I'm going to think differently. I'm going to act differently. And I'm going to expose myself to a whole different world by doing that. So,
Yeah, love it. All right. So, with that, MC Radio Unconscious Bias, we are officially off air. So, until next time, we'll catch you soon.
bye.
Bye, everyone.